Starting it now, so hopefully we'll start to see some people piling in. We've got 55 people registered this morning, which by normal calculations mean we could end up with around 40, which is just below about average, but let's see, we might get 55. Average is about 50. Good morning to those of you who are joining us. Just bear with us while we get a number of people in. If you'd like to use your chat menu, you can let us know where you're from, who you are, and maybe you'd like to just give an indication of what interest you may have in nuclear energy in Hinkley Point. For those of you who are also new to Zoom, and I'm sure many of you are not these days, Andrew is going to be hopeful of taking a number of questions from you. So I think we'll start by using the Q&A menu. So if you want to type your questions into the question and answer menu, I'll make sure that Andrew answers your questions. If you'd like to own them, there is a chance we could also bring you in, and what we hope is during the hour we have, we'll be able to open up some discussion on what is quite a political, but also quite a very important economic topic for our zero carbon future. Just wait another minute, there's still people just ticking through. One person's tapped in as a local resident, so be interesting questions, I think, on that for you, Andrew. We have nearly 25 of us in at the moment, so just give it another minute or two and see if we get any more. A lot of people sign in during the first 5 minutes. We do record today's session, and the presentation will also be available in the next 24 hours or so for people to listen again, or maybe for friends of yours if you'd like to pass it on to listen to the first time. I think what we'll do is we won't keep everyone waiting, Andrew. If you're happy, I think we'll start. So for those of you who are coming for a first time, welcome. This is a second series. We ran a first series of webinars twice a week through the COVID-19 lockdown. We're now running these once a week. The aim of being is to get as many people to contribute in a diverse area interested in the construction and greater wider built environment. We're welcoming for the first time a new partner, which is actually constructing excellence itself, rather than just the 4 regional members. So welcome if you're a member of that. I'm going to now ask Andrew, I think, to introduce himself and give some background. So Andrew, over to you, and I look very much forward to listening to what you say. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Howard. And yeah, just to re-emphasise, thank you to everyone for dialing in and you know, showing interest in Hinkley Point C, which you know, as Howard and I were discussing earlier, actually, you know, a fascinating topic, moving away from just sort of the engineering and construction side of things into all things political, economic, and environmental as well. So there's an awful lot within this within this area, and I'm going to do my best over the next 30 minutes or so to give you a general update on Hinkley Point C, particularly where we are today, and our plans for the future. So that's the plan. As I say, so that will take around half an hour. Often, you know, with such a broad topic area, some of the interest does come from the questions. So I would invite you, sort of, as we are going through, just to, as Howard said, to log your questions within the Q&A area, and then once we're finished with the main presentation, we can launch into a bit of a discussion. So without further ado, I mean, Howard, I'm wondering if you can kick the slides off, please, if that's all right. There we go. First and foremost, and there's a good, if you've just gone to slide number 2, first and foremost, do need to sort of look at the context for nuclear as a whole. As I said, this topic area on its own, we could devote an hour to talking through. But fundamentally, here in the UK, and actually you could equate that up to the global level as well, we are facing a need to, one, get to net zero, and how we meet a future energy demand. And this is a very simple graph which shows our energy supply now and our projected energy supply needs in 2035. So in totality, our energy needs are set to increase a little bit, and there is hope that a lot of that can be offset by improvements in efficiency. But really, the nub of this is that we are going to, over the next couple of decades, we're going to lose a lot of power from the grid. And that sort of loss is going to come from a significant reduction in gas, a complete reduction in coal, a reduction in our nuclear capacity as well. Many of our current fleet of nuclear power stations are coming to the end of their operational lives, and that leaves us with a gap, and you can see that with that sort of black and white hashed area. The big question, and sort of, as I said, this is a topic area in its own right, is how to fill that gap whilst allowing us as the UK to reach net zero. Now, nuclear has a big part to play in that future energy mix, and that's something we as EDF and the UK government strongly support, and that's why we're working at Hinkley Point C and some of our future proposed stations to get additional nuclear capacity back on the grid, remembering that nuclear is a very secure, stable baseload power generating source that Hinkley Point C alone, can fill around about 7% of the UK's demand just from that one power station, and do that in a very low carbon way. And just remembering that nuclear actually generates 0 carbon whilst it's operating. So Howard, if you could just jump to the next slide for me, please, just to give you the basic grounding of Hinkley Point C before we get into the detail. As I said, Hinkley Point C is the first of a set of planned new nuclear power stations for the UK. For us as EDF, we have Hinkley Point C down in Somerset under construction. And we also have working with government on proposals for Sizewell C in Suffolk, and also working with our partners CGN to develop an additional station over in Bradwell. Hinkley Point C in isolation, once operational in 2025, will provide energy for 7% of the UK, and that can translate down to around 6 million homes. So substantial amount. And thinking back to that first graph we looked at, as part of nuclear can meet that future energy demand. We'll get onto this in slightly more detail further down the presentation, but I think especially in today's context, and for those of you in the construction and engineering sector, the value of major infrastructure projects, particularly these mega projects, and the value that they can provide to the UK economy, and also to people's skills development, jobs creation, shouldn't be underestimated. So in total, we're looking at around about a £20 billion investment into Britain. And in terms of job creation for Hinkley Point C alone, we expect around 25,000 job opportunities to be created over the course of the construction, and then into operation around 900 full-time posts for its 60 years of operation in the future. Okay, so Howard, if you've just gone to slide 4, please. So this is something that, we often talk about, Hinkley Point C as just a generic power station. I think it's often good to really understand what it is. Hinkley Point C is, you'll hear about it termed an EPR reactor. So that's almost like its brand name. There are various sort of connotations of that, but really you can think of that EPR acronym standing for either European or evolutionary pressurized water reactor. European because it is a European design, and an evolutionary because it's not a new design, and that's something that I think is an important point to make. The EPR design that we're building at Hinkley Point C is not fundamentally new. It's built from hundreds and thousands of reactor years of operation across other European designs, and what it does is builds upon those. So we take the best sort of efficiency measures from some, the best safety measures from others, and we build it together to create the Hinkley Point C EPR, or UK EPR as it's now known. So fundamentally, some of the important elements there, the EPR reactor is more efficient than previous. So it uses less uranium. In doing so, it produces less long-lived radioactive wastes compared to other pressurized water reactors. And this is also sort of seen as at the absolute pinnacle of safety, and that's obviously very, very important. So the EPR introduces a number of additional safety measures over and above those already in today, notwithstanding that the nuclear industry as a de facto operates at an extremely high level of safety. By way of an example, the EPR reactor sort of operates with four entirely independent, technologically separated safety systems. So sort of if there is a problem, you have this multiple level of redundancy. So you have your main systems, a backup for that main system, a backup for that backup, and failing that, another backup. And as I said, that's nuclear, the nuclear industry as a whole, but the EPR design takes that to a whole new level. So slide 5, please, Howard, if that's okay. And this will just give you this is the schematic of Hinkley Point C, just the single reactor. But just this will give you an idea of what the final power station will look like. Now, I should reinforce that Hinkley Point C is 2 reactors. You're just seeing one here. So Hinkley will have 2, one side by side. So we'll have 2 reactor buildings, which is where all of the reactor core is situated. We call that the nuclear island. And just in front of that, you have the turbine building, which we call the conventional island. That will make more sense in a second. And then out the front of the turbine building at Hinkley Point C is all of our cooling water infrastructure. So we bring in cooling water from the Bristol Channel in our example at Hinkley, and that's used to condense the water from the turbines in a very, very almost exactly similar way to any other conventional power station. And that's a general point, actually. You can see here, people often think the nuclear is very, very different, and it is. It is very different in the way we generate heat, but the basic principles of generating heat to boil water, to make steam, to turn a turbine, and to then sort of allow a generator to produce energy is exactly the same in a nuclear power station as it would be in coal or gas. So that's your basics in sort of reactor setup and an operation. So how's this actually being translated to Hinkley Point C on the ground? So Howard, if you go to slide 6, please, this will give you a satellite image of Hinkley Point C, and this is a satellite image from last month. So there's a lot going on. You'll be able to see here a lot of detail, and I've picked out some key areas to show you. So building from that last slide, if you can remember back to that basic CGI schematic, those circular areas you can see sort of designated Unit 1 and Unit 2, those are that's the nuclear island I mentioned. And that's where the core of the reactor will be situated. So that's really your nuclear area. In front of that is your 2 turbine halls for both Unit 1 and Unit 2. And you can see, particularly on Unit 1, we're actually sort of making good progress on the conventional side of the power station now. And then in front of that, you'll see the latest on where we are with cooling water infrastructure in our tunnelling. Obviously, the tunnels are completely invisible to the naked eye, but shouldn't be discounted as a major piece of engineering work that's hidden to the naked eye. Sort of particular other elements I'd just like to sort of point out. You'll see just to the probably 7 o'clock mark on the Unit 1 box, you'll see a sort of a yellow and blue structure. That's the location of Big Carl. So Big Carl is the world's largest crane that we have at Hinkley Point C. That has the capacity to lift thousands of tons. We won't be actually going near to its full capacity, and is around about 280 meters tall. So a serious piece of engineering equipment, and it's sort of I think in summary, when we come to engineering, most things on Hinkley Point C are big and very advanced, and yeah, it's just a very easy example of seeing that. You'll also see some other structures which you might think are a little bit odd and interesting. So these sort of, you can see 2 circular sort of domes on the ground there. Now, sort of to the untrained eye, they might actually look like the reactor buildings themselves, but when we're talking about construction, and we'll talk about efficiencies in a little bit, but learning from other projects is really important. And those domes that you can see there are effectively prefabrication buildings. So they're big weather-tight structures, and we use that to produce some very specialist pieces of the reactor in nice controlled environments. So we'll get onto that in a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure you had visibility of what they were, because they can look a little bit odd from the satellite image. So Howard, if we go on to the next slide, please, which just a summary of where we are. So we're progressing very well. So during 2019, all of our project goals were completed on time, and sort of you can see sort of some of those key elements there. We started the tunnelling work. We completed the reactor base for Unit 1. The engineering for the inner containment has all been completed, and sort of manufacturing for some of those major pieces of internal equipment, such as a pressurizer, which is an essential part of the reactor nuclear steam supply system, have all been completed. Moving into 2020, you'll see sort of goal 1, goal 2 also completed, and particularly noteworthy is the fact that those 2 goals have been completed despite the challenges posed by coronavirus. So as with everyone, I think, not even the construction sector, that has posed a big challenge for us. We had to drastically reduce our workforce numbers to enable social distancing. We had to sort of make a number of other changes to enable our workforce and the communities around us to maintain safety. And I say safety is COVID-19 safety, not your traditional construction safety, which is always there. But that has posed some challenges, and we've had to concentrate our attentions on the critical path. And actually, it was a very proud moment when we were able to complete goal 2, which is the foundations for the 2nd unit, absolutely on schedule in June of this summer, and particularly noteworthy that was a date that we put into the schedule over 4 years ago now. So the project is on track. We're still ascertaining the impact of COVID-19 on our schedules, but we are doing our best to keep things moving as best we can. So if you move on to the next slide, Howard, all of this progress should become very clear. So I've got some side-by-side shots here, which should give you a really clear example of how we're progressing down at the Hinkley Point C site itself. So this is January 2020 versus July 2020. So that 6-month snapshot. This first one shows the progress made at Unit 1, so the first reactor. So important here, you can see what we've been doing is actually installing some of the permanent components. And the way I really explain this to people is, and I know it might seem an oversimplification, but over the past sort of 2 to 3 years, we have really almost been in preparation mode. And it's not until the foundations of the reactor have been in place that we've actually been able to start building upwards, and actually you see the bare bones of a power station and building starting to come together. And I think that's very clear from that photo. You can see the containment wall rising up, and inside the containment structure, that circular building, you can actually see some permanent components of the finished power station going into place. So just to reinforce sort of that progress during this continued pandemic that we're all facing. 65 walls have been poured, 3 suspended slabs, and sort of 3 additional pits. 2 sections of the we call them the HK columns, so that's the fuel handling buildings, have also been poured, and those big structures you can see on the right hand side of the reactor building itself. So really good progress over at Unit 2, and that will be continuing. So Howard, next slide please, and we'll go to Unit 2. Unit 2, as I said, is around about 12 months behind Unit 1, and that stagger is intentional. So that allows us, there's efficiency there because it allows workforce from Unit 1 to gain the learnings and move across to Unit 2 and make it quicker. And that's something we're seeing time and time again, actually. And we're actually, in some ways, have been moments when we've had to hold Unit 2 back a little bit in order to maintain some separation, because Unit 2, we're seeing on multiple metrics, is doing things faster, safer, and more efficiently than at Unit 1. And it's this learning point that is really, really vital, and actually sort of a learning point for constructing excellence really is sort of, for me personally, is how sort of those learnings can be shared more broadly across the industry, and how we can sort of gain from any advice as well, and on efficiencies and safety and all the other big metrics that we need. But in summary, Unit 2 also progressing well after the completion of its reactor base in June. So next slide please, Howard. So this shows, and this is pretty also very recent progress. So as I said, so you've got your different aspects of the power station. You have your nuclear island, you also have your conventional island. And the conventional island is really where the magic comes to life. This is where the electricity is actually generated by the turbines and out onto the national grid. And we're seeing the completion of the basic foundations for that platform. And only a month or so ago, we saw the installation of the TG columns. So these are very large steel columns, actually manufactured just over the water from us in Wales. There's 15 of those in total. They're 17 meters high, 14 tons per unit, and they will support the turbines in due course. And this being Hinkley, those turbines are also the largest single shaft turbines in the world, and the most powerful that you can get. And just worth reinforcing as well, I was talking to the teams on site, and these TG columns will be supporting concrete support platforms, which themselves are hundreds of tons. So again, as with the reactor buildings, we'll be seeing this this conventional island platform growing up in the future. Okay, Howard, next slide, please, if that's all right. Now, a hidden piece of progress, again, sort of not visible, but the cooling water infrastructure required for Hinkley Point C is substantial, and we actually need to excavate 3 separate tunnels, 2 inlet tunnels for the reactors and 1 single outlet structure. And to do that, we have 3 tunnel boring machines now out in operation, or just about ready to start digging. The most advanced tunnel is the inlet tunnel for Unit 1, and that's currently 2 kilometres out to the under the Bristol Channel as of today, and it's sort of out of a total distance of just over 3 kilometres. So over 3/4 of the way now to completing that first tunnel for Unit 1. And, you know, talking about significant milestones, those tunnelling teams are working very effectively. They've gone 3 years without a lost time incident now. So it's you know, although they haven't completed their kind of, you know, their formal engineering milestone just yet, and that's not scheduled until sort of towards the end of this year. Just to give them some you know, some kudos on that front, that they are doing, the teams on the tunnelling doing very well indeed to keep that on track. Okay, next slide please, Howard. That's okay. A very visually exciting one, and sort of our latest milestone, which is completed only on early hours of Sunday morning, actually. So good to give you this update, was the lift of Unit 2's liner cup. So this is a good example of the use of Big Carl, that enormous crane we have. And the liner cup is really the base for the reactor itself, and it's 170 tons. And it's lifted over a period of sort of over well, last lift was 7 hours in total, and you can see sort of this structure being lifted out of those prefabrication buildings that I mentioned when we're looking at the site map, and put into and on top of the reactor base for Unit 2. So, you know, talking about learnings, the liner cup for Unit 2 was completed 30% quicker than the identical part on Unit 1, and is just an example of how those prefabrication buildings can really, really help. It enables all of the complex welding to be done in a nice weather-tight environment, so it helps quality, helps safety, and it helps efficiency. Lovely, Howard. So the next one, please, and it's just to build on this efficiency piece. So there's 2 elements to efficiency, and I said this is very important to our project. Firstly, we learn from experience for construction of other EPRs around the world. So notably, the EPR that's now in operation over in China, Taishan, and also at Hinkley Point C sister station over in France at Flamanville. Now, many of you will know that Flamanville is behind schedule, and that's accepted. Now, you know, I suppose if there is a benefit of that, is that we know that we are not going to make any of the errors that have led to those delays at Flamanville, so we can take all of that learning across to Hinkley Point C, and that's a very active process that we're taking on. We can also learn from the nuclear industry as a whole, you know, so it doesn't always have to be an EPR reactor, but there's a lot of nuclear construction ongoing around the world, and we're always out there learning to take those examples to improve. But something we've seen, you know, a bit closer to home actually, which is worth referencing, is how we can take the learnings from Unit 1 to Unit 2. And there's a lot, and I've sort of spoken about just then sort of the liner cup, but it really counts for everything. You know, there's a lot of, you know, a lot of repetition involved in the construction of Hinkley Point C, and we can, you know, look to these examples just by way of, you know, the big numbers here. So in sort of in the end of March, we had 4,667 tons of steel installed on Unit 2. Now, in the same time frame at Unit 1, that was down to just over 3,000 tons. So you can see immediately the efficiency of how we can weave together all of this steel reinforcement is improving just in those few months from people transferring their knowledge from the first to the second. And sort of that sort of rebar installation time, you know, we've got an improvement factor of 1.6 for rebar installation straight off the bat. So yeah, there's a lot of detail within there, but hopefully sort of that sort of makes that point around the importance of learning development. And yeah, just to say we're always keen to hear from examples from across the sector to help. Okay, Howard, next slide, please. Sort of coronavirus, and I just thought it would be worth touching on this because you know, it has been a challenge, and for us as a construction site particularly so. At the start of the pandemic, we were designated as a nationally important infrastructure project, so we were able to continue operations, but I'd say it was far from business as usual. We reduced our construction workforce by around half. So into the March-April period, we were down to only about 2,500 people on site. We then sort of moved from there to introducing sort of a huge range of measures, which you'll see on the slide, to protect the workforce and the community going forward. And sort of we've using those protection measures and understanding how we can maintain social distancing, whether it be on the logistical side and transport, to, you know, how we operate our canteens. And you can sort of see the, you know, quite bleak but effective way the canteens, you know, people are segregated in the canteens now. We're working to build the workforce back up to a sort of a higher level. We're still not back to where we were, and we don't expect to be back there really anytime soon, but sort of currently our workforce is around 4,500 people on site in a 24-hour period. So as it says there, below pre-pandemic levels. And then we're also, you know, as I think everyone is, we have our eye on winter, and preparing plans for how we potentially deal with an increase in the pandemic, and sort of an increase in sort of any sort of local spikes. And to do that, we're working closely with all of our partners at local authority level and public health, and our local stakeholders at a very local level actually, to look at how we do that. And that will also include sort of using our own testing capacity. So we have our own testing facility, so we don't have to rely on the NHS to provide that also. So again, sort of reducing our burden on the national picture. Okay, Howard, slide 15, if that's all right. And so sort of building on that, I made a comment right at the outset about the benefit that a major infrastructure project can provide. And at Hinkley, you know, this is very, very important for us. We have a long project, so the build time of around 10 years, but then we are here operating in the Southwest for, you know, potentially over 60 years of operation of Hinkley Point C. So it's very important that we, one, enable the opportunities of the project now to be opened up to to people across the southwest and actually the UK as a whole. But secondly, how we continue the legacy of that, and how sort of as we move into operation, we can continue what we've done to sort of, you know, in particular overcome nationally significant skills gaps. How we can sort of work to continue our drive to improve social mobility within the area we work, and also support our local supply chain as they sort of move into the wider sectors of nuclear and construction in general. But sort of just looking at the figures, you'll see sort of that the impact is large and growing. So sort of at the macro level, we expect that 64% of the value of construction to go to UK-based companies. And as Andrew at the team at Constructing Excellence Southwest will know, though, you know, we have a very strong focus on ensuring that sort of at the local and regional level, we're supporting those businesses to enter the nuclear supply chain, and to sort of understand sort of any subtleties of entering an industry that can sometimes feel a bit daunting, given the quality and safety requirements. But the team have been very effective at helping that, sort of working particularly with partners in the Somerset Chamber of Commerce, for example, and sort of the wider Hinkley supply chain team. We've been able to, we set a target at the start of the project to spend 1.5 billion within the Southwest economy. Today, even you know, this sort of, you know, early stage relatively, we spent over 2, and that's testament to that engagement and to the you know, to the benefits it is providing to local businesses. On jobs as well, we have a target of creating 25,000 new employment opportunities. We've created over 11,000 to date, and we, you know, again, sort of looking to allow local people to gain most from that opportunity. So we have a dedicated job service to support people into employment across the supply chain, and it's very positive to see that we're maintaining a good local workforce. At the moment, around 40% of people working on the project are from the local area, so that is very good to see. And then training and skills, important for us, but also important for the wider construction and engineering sector, to overcome skills gaps, and apprentices are really at the forefront of that for us. We set ourselves a pretty daunting target of training 1,000 new apprentices throughout the build phase, but we're making good progress against that. So just over 650 apprentices have already been trained to date, and that's across a number of different areas, you know, from the sort of core construction skills through to project management, finance, nuclear engineering, and even into the service sector. So working with the Somerset Larder, our catering provider, for example, to support apprenticeships and traineeships for them, and our accommodation provider, sort of supporting the hospitality side of things. So working together, you know, all of these areas sort of, it's almost as a pipeline really, are supporting the regional economy, both now and, you know, our plan is to work together with everyone in the region to make sure that that's a sustainable legacy that we can leave. I'm just for the next slide, Howard, which is just a nice visualization really of sort of the depth. It's a pretty quick and dirty visualization, but just shows, you know, our supply chain and the sort of breadth across the UK. So each one of those tiny strands represents a business working at Hinkley Point C across our supply chain. So you can really see it touches pretty much every single region of the UK, and there is regional value to each of them. If you want more information on that, we have a good set of web pages. If you just type in EDF built in Britain into your chosen search engine, you'll be able to find that as quite an interesting supply chain mapping tool that you can make use of if you wanted to. So you can look at specific counties, regional areas, and have a look at the supply chain in those areas in real detail. So I'd invite you to have a look at that if you get a chance. And then finally, the final slide, and I mentioned it at the in my introduction, just on Sizewell C. So, you know, I'm talking about progress at Hinkley Point here in detail, but it's worth remembering that Sizewell C is also progressing. Sizewell C is still a proposed station. I would just reinforce that. But we have submitted our development consent order to the Planning Inspectorate for their review and decision. So that's been through its consultation phase. All of those consultation responses are being reviewed. And we're looking forward to receiving some clarity through the government's forthcoming energy white paper and our discussions on a financing mechanism. But yeah, just sort of on the construction of Sizewell C more generally, the diagram that you can see, you'll see is sort of has some green bits and some orange bits. The green bits are elements that are directly replicated from Hinkley Point C, and you can see there is a lot of green and very little orange, the orange being the bits that are Sizewell C specific. Now, going back to that learning, that diagram is very important there, because it means that replication from Hinkley to Sizewell means that we can reduce costs substantially from one station to another. So we believe we can reduce the cost of Sizewell C by 20% on Hinkley Point C, and that's through you know, design savings, lower development costs, staff continuity, and all of these learnings, smaller learnings that we can build together. So as I said, Sizewell still in its planning phase, and more progress on that in the coming months. So that's it. I'm sorry, I've had to sort of rattle through quite a bit there. So I hope that's a good synopsis, and yeah, often wish we had more time, but good to open up for questions if people have them.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very interesting indeed. I've got a couple of questions in the Q&A box, and one that's come in through the chat. So I'll take the chat one first. How have your contracts dealt with COVID, e.g. in terms of allowing time and or money to contractors?
So I can't speak for specific contracts in answer to that question, but it has been something, you know, we've been very clear that we want to support our supply chain here. So we've been, in sort of very broad terms, very supportive of those businesses within the supply chain who are struggling. So we know, for example, you know, we've seen numbers of factory closures throughout our supply chain in the UK and abroad. You know, and it's not the case that we are, you know, really digging in contractually with our supply chain, you know, demanding that they open again. It's far from it. I think this is a partnership, and is something that we are working together on. You know, Hinkley is one team, and the pandemic is a global challenge without precedent. So yeah, I can't speak for particular sort of contracts, obviously, but in broad terms, it's been one of support and collaboration to get us through.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a couple of other questions here. It's anonymous. What happens to the nuclear waste after it has been processed on site in the dedicated building we saw on the plan earlier?
Yes. I think that's a very good question. And that was very, you know, the person asking that question has a good understanding of the Hinkley Point C sort of site plan as well. So just so that everyone here sort of understands, in terms of the waste fuel from the power station, we have an intermediate fuel storage building on site, which is designed to house all of the spent fuel from the reactor for its operational lifetime. And that building is on site. Now, this is when we move into sort of long-term government policy on waste. So UK government is responsible for the management of radioactive waste in the UK, and they will continue to do that. The long-term plan for managing radioactive waste is a concept called deep geological disposal. So in summary, that means finding an area where waste can be buried sort of a number of kilometres underground in geologically stable rock strata, most probably clay, where waste can be secured for geological timescales. That's an important thing to remember. So, you know, that is the long-term sort of route for radioactive waste in the UK, and the government is currently consulting on where that long-term waste repository will be.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, whilst we're dealing with the sort of geological side, we have a question here. Are the structures, and in brackets especially those housing the reactors, earthquake proof?
Yes, yeah, that's a good segue. Yes, they are. Yeah, they are. Yeah, the buildings, the nuclear island and the other sort of buildings around it are all seismically qualified. And there's been a lot of work to model sort of earthquakes effectively. And that goes way beyond, you know, any earthquakes that we have ever seen in the UK. I would sort of reinforce that, you know, we are not on a fault zone, but that has not stopped the studies being done to forecast how the power station would react. And you look at sort of the foundations, you know, and sort of look at sort of how thick just that, I mean, the reactor itself is based on bedrock, and then on top of that, the foundations are over 4 meters thick of seismically sort of qualified concrete, onto which the reactor building, which is also seismically qualified, goes on top. Now, sort of also sort of broadening that out, all of the safeguard buildings also have earthquake protection installed on them as well. So, you know, the reactor itself and the backup systems all factored in.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Another question here, which probably is environmental. Will the outfall impact temperatures in the Bristol Channel?
It's a good question. Yeah, well, they will. So as we bring in water to cool to condense the water from the turbines, that water is brought into the power station, and yes, the temperature is increased as it is discharged to the Bristol Channel. Though that increase in temperature is heavily regulated by the Environment Agency, and I mean, the concept of these thermal plumes that sort of are as a result of any form of power station operating, whereby water is discharged at a higher temperature. There's a lot of research on that that's used, and sort of that's gone into, you know, within our DCO approving our kind of discharge temperatures and governing the impact of that thermal plume. All the research that's been done on sort of that relatively small temperature increase, and don't quote me on it because I don't have it to hand, but it's relatively limited, but also overseen directly by a regulator to make sure that that does not have an impact on the marine environment.
Okay, thanks very much. This country has an again, it's anonymous. This country has an historical issue of projects running over budget behind time. Is 2025 realistic, and will the project be delivered to budget?
Yes, you know, that is our plan. You know, we are currently running to schedule, and we do expect to be generating power from Unit 1 in 2025 as planned. I would say that, you know, it's a very, very difficult situation right now to ascertain the full impact of coronavirus, and you know, not directly just on site, but to the entire supply chain. So we're working through that. But yes, right now, and sort of I hope sort of you'll have seen that, you know, we made a schedule back in 2016, and we're hitting the milestones that we scheduled back then, you know, with the foundations for Unit 2. So, you know, we are on track, and we'll continue to sort of, you know, keep it on track as far as we can. But, you know, I said we do live in a very, very strange world at the moment. So it's something that we've got under review. But yeah, 2025 for Unit 1 is still the target.
Okay, thanks. This question that's from Zoe Lonsdale. How are you dealing with the logistics of getting workers in and out of site at the beginning and end of shifts?
So, Zoe, I assume that sort of that question is targeted towards coronavirus and how we're doing that under the present conditions. I don't know if you can, Zoe can respond. Can Zoe respond?
If Zoe wants to, I can try and bring Zoe in.
Yeah. I can start with sort of that assumption, because I think it's a very good point. You know, how do we do it? So,
okay, Zoe, I have opened your ability with a camera and a mic. If you just want to ask a question with the microphone, just open your microphone. If you want to come on screen, please do.
Hi, yeah, it was partially corona, but also the fact that you've got such a huge volume of people working on site. It must be quite a challenge. And obviously there's the security surrounding the actual site itself. You know, it must be quite a difficult means to look after, really.
Yeah, no, it is, and sort of, you know, it's a logistical challenge at the best of times to get that volume in. I mean, to answer the question, so, you know, even in normal times, all of our workforce and sort of managing them through the shifts is done via park and ride facilities. So people don't drive directly to the site, for example. So everyone, it's a bit like freight, sort of in terms of consolidation. So people are managed through the park and ride facilities, which allows us quite a bit of control. And those are our own facilities that we have. Managing the number of people through to site during a pandemic, obviously we've reduced the total volume of our workforce, which is helping. But saying that, we've had to reduce the capacity of our buses to enable social distancing. So we've actually had to increase the number of buses that we have, and also been fitting, you know, each of our buses has partition screens in them as well, to enable greater levels of social distancing on the buses. You know, notwithstanding that all the sort of general transport policy of masks is also applied. But then the next stage is actually the shifts themselves. So we've actually adjusted the shift patterns in order to reduce sort of and actually introduce an extra shift to sort of rebalance the sort of the worker movements, as it were, and reduce some of the crossover, reduce some of the sort of like real hotspots where there's lots of people coming backwards and forwards at the same time. So coming together, that helps. The other thing to mention is we've actually sort of stopped all the pickup points for our sort of busing system within the local community as well, just so that we're avoiding, sort of making sure we're keeping that community safe as well as our own workforce.
Okay, thank you. I've got two more questions here, but I think they actually go together, so I'll read both of them. Do you think there is a stigma, a fear about nuclear power in the UK? If so, how do you deal with this locally and beyond? And I think it links to the next one. How did local communities react to the project being located on their doorstep? E.g., impact on the environment, biodiversity, increased traffic, housing requirements, and infrastructure.
They work perfectly side by side, those questions actually. So in terms of perception, and I was quite lucky. I've been involved in Hinkley Point C since the planning stage. So since we were sort of going through the consultation for our plans. So it's worth remembering that sort of the community surrounding Hinkley Point B as a whole, and that's Hinkley Point C, Hinkley Point A, which is now decommissioned, and Hinkley Point B. The fact there's a nuclear power station in operation close by is not necessarily a big issue. There are concerns, obviously, around nuclear safety, but on the whole, sort of that community, and this is shared through research actually throughout the UK, that communities surrounding nuclear power stations are often more supportive of nuclear power than those that are slightly further away. So it's sort of a slightly illogical, position, but when you think about it, it does make sense. Now, in terms of opposition, and it's as that second question said, although the local population, as a whole, were not against the concept of a nuclear power station being built, there were concerns around, those physical impacts of construction. So transport, accommodation, for example, two principal areas that there were concern. And that's the value of the consultation phase. So through that public consultation, we were able to better understand it, and a number of changes were made as a result. So changes in our accommodation strategy, for example, understanding people's concerns over transport allowed us to work with the local authorities to put in place some of our mitigation measures for highway improvement works, for example, the location of the park and ride sites. So it sort of goes back, and you'll see it, referencing where Sizewell is now. That consultation phase is a really important part to be able to understand those key concerns, not necessarily about nuclear power as a whole concept, but around the local impact. And that local impact is still being managed today. And it's not as though, we as a developer have kind of put in place our mitigation measures and walked away. It's something we are still working very, very closely with the community on. And we have even today, actually, I was looking ahead at an agenda for the transport forum, which is happening in a few weeks' time. We have our community forum next week, and all of these sort of localized issues are still being discussed and working together to mitigate them.
Okay, thank you. We've got about 1 minute left. We can probably go a minute just after the time. I've got Thomas Nachi who raised a hand. So Thomas, do you have a question? If so, please briefly put it to Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. I was quite interested in the last graphic that you showed, which was about savings that are going to be made on the new plant. I can't remember, Sizewell C. Yeah. And basically that will be savings from the experience and the lessons learned from Hinkley Point C. You quoted like a 20% reduction in all the in the costs. First question is, do you think that is definitely going to be realized, or do you have confidence that it's going to be realized? The second question is really, can that be improved?
Yeah, well, so the first one, yes, 100% we can realise those, and we know we can realise those because we're already seeing those cost sort of savings, efficiency savings being made from Unit 1 to Unit 2 of Hinkley Point C. So we know that, it's not a pie in the sky. It is an empirical saving that we know is working. So I would say yes, 100%. We also know that we can also sort of reduce substantial cost through, a big part of sort of this, a major infrastructure financing is via the cost of financing itself. So, and that's through risk reduction. So, and that comes down to sort of investment risk effectively. So if we can reduce the risk of construction as well, that reduces the cost of borrowing, which is another more broad cost reduction strategy. Now, that comes down to a lot of other factors, including the financing mechanism for Sizewell C that, again, we probably can't get into now given time. But yeah, so yes, sorry, your second point, have I covered it off, or?
Yeah, you pretty much covered it in the last bits that you talked about, because I was just thinking that, there must be an opportunity to actually make better than 20% savings if you're realistically making use of the experience from Hinkley Point C. And also from the graphic, there was just a few orange bits. Which would be you're actually replicating. Well, when I say replicating, it's really you're reusing whatever has been done on there. Where you actually now people know what they're doing. They've been on the training ground. They need to be just doing what they need to do.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I sometimes think the same. Maybe we could go further. Logically it does. Yeah, you're right. It looks like we can. Yeah, point taken.
Okay,
thank you.
I think that we've run over time, so many thanks, Andrew, for your time, and many thanks for answering all of the questions that people posed. All I'd like to say is thank you for everyone who's coming, and next week we have a bit of an experiment, which is we're going to have a panel representing 4 regions of the Construction Excellence Network. The aim to be to discuss local and national issues, and hopefully we'll get some good conversations that matter. So many thanks to you all, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Howard. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Have a great weekend yourself. I assume you work a normal Monday to Friday, do you?
Yeah, well, yeah, I like to
officially, yes.
Officially, yeah, exactly. But yes, yeah. I'm going to enjoy some sunshine, I think.
Yeah, it looks like it could be good for the weekend, so have a great time. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Howard.
Bye.